Welcome to Fort Fritz, your one-stop for news, current events, and all forms of entertainment relating to the supernatural, the paranormal, the Fortean, and things that go bump in the night, all packaged and presented by Know-Nothing Know-It-Alls, entertaining the unknown. Hello, I am your host, Fritz, and for the next hour, we are jumping right into our favorite stories to keep us occupied. We begin tonight with a story of unexplainable and mysterious origin. This is Kaikoura Lights. You can find this one on the iHeartRadio app. Just search Fort Fritz and Fort Fritz Campfire Tales.
Sure. You guys ever hear about the Kaikoura Lights? The Kaikoura Lights is the name given to a series of unexplained phenomenon occurring over the Kaikoura region of New Zealand.
How do you spell that?
Kaikoura.
Okay.
In this region in New Zealand in 1978, there were two separate instances of these unexplained lights tracking aircraft around Kaikoura, New Zealand. Initially, the first sighting was made on December 21st. It was the crew of a cargo aircraft radioed into a local air traffic controller and said, there's these weird lights basically tracking us. They're on the side of the plane, and then they're updating as the position of the lights is changing. It's above the plane, now it's hovering, now it's fallen back, and they can't see it anymore. Now it's returned, it's on the other side of the wing. So this light is moving alongside them, it's falling back, it seems to observe them in some way. Simultaneously, police and various emergency services in the area were getting frantic phone calls from people about these strange lights that are showing up over their towns and the area. Several other air traffic controllers reported seeing what they called a paint on the radar, which was basically a blip. They're seeing this thing, but it doesn't have a record. It's not supposed to be there, and it's there 1 second and gone the next, and they're not really sure what's going on. So this caused kind of an uproar in the community. Everybody kind of wanted to know what was going on. They reached out to the Ministry of Defense for New Zealand. They were like, hey, look, what's going on? Are we being attacked? Like, what's happening? And the explanations that the New Zealand government gave to the people were that they were lights from squid boats, that it was the light of Venus, that it was unburnt meteors, that they were cars and trains.
In the sky?
Right.
That followed planes?
Well, okay, so you have the sun as the brightest object in our sky. You've got the moon at number 2. Venus is number 3. It's incredibly bright.
Oh, I'm sure, but I don't believe that the light reflecting from Venus is able to move alongside your plane and track it and change position and disappear and come back. So, needless to say, these people were extremely frightened, so much so that news crew from Australia decided to send over a filming crew to interview some people about the sightings to ask them what happened. So again, 9 days later, on the evening of December 30th, 1978, the television crew that came to interview people about their sightings for the initial light sightings, the television crew was en route to their filming location and witnessed the lights for themselves and actually were able to capture footage of these lights tracking their aircraft, moving around in sort of erratic patterns, following them, stopping. Certain of the photographs that you can see, things apparently being dropped off. There are these sort of almost transparent sort of discs that appear to like fall away as they leave the bottom of the craft. Like a green turtle shell.
That's a speed bump.
Once again, this is something that just sort of blew up in the area. Everybody was, naturally horrified. There was this unexplained, mysterious light that was kind of beaming around, and people they weren't getting a solid explanation from the government. And not only that, but now we're in the age of, film. Like, they were able to capture this on camera, and we have evidence. And if you've never seen the footage of the Kaikoura lights, look it up because it is supremely spooky.
Really?
Yes.
Are they all?
And it's good footage. It's not.
Well,
like,
I mean, it's from '78. Like,
yeah, but still, it's not like because a lot of times it's like grab the worst camera we've ever seen.
So only 9 days later did this second occurrence happen to the news crew that came to interview the people who had seen the first one.
Were all of these lights, since you've watched the video, I haven't seen it, were all of these lights the same color? Were they all just like white lights, or were they multicolored?
So the lights that you see, obviously, from the 1978 camera crew footage is this sort of bright white, yellowish moving orb, right? The descriptions from the pilot varies. Like the initially he's saying it looks like it's as big as a house. There has to be something huge off to our left. And then he says, never mind. I'm seeing like sort of a wall of blinking lights. These like really quickly blinking lights. I'm not sure what's going on. And then the blinking stopped, and then the bigger lights resumed. So there appeared to be some sort of changing that was happening with the lights. They weren't able to get a solid view on whatever this thing was, but it was definitely able to not only keep up with their craft, but change position around it very quickly, and then also be gone instantly, and have our advanced radar detection services not able to pick it up. There was a man named Ian Uffendell working at an Air Force base in the area that has an additional story to add to this, in that he was working the whole week of the initial light sighting. So he was there during the initial panic and their sort of data collection and stuff like that. What he says is that the stories of the Kaikoura lights do not tell you that on December 18th, the night before the famous sightings, two children, they called them children, but I guess these people were 15, 16, they were teenagers, burst into a police station and were frantic, and they were unable to basically get a straight story out of them. As they pieced the story together, these two kids were essentially chased down some strange mountain road in New Zealand by a light at ground level with their car that would catch up to the passenger side, drop back behind them, catch up to the driver's side, move away. When they tried to stop and sort of investigate, it would like go away and then resume tracking them, maybe like a mile later down the road. So
that would kind of play hand in hand with that highly maneuverable craft that the pilot was talking about as well. And if these were being dropped from like a mothership, it's almost like this acting drone in a way. Right.
I mean, to us now, it sounds like we can, in 2017, I could tell you, maybe there was like a really nice
recon drone,
right? A really nicely made
recon,
recon drone. Yeah. Now, that seems feasible. In 1978, I'm sure they didn't think anything about that. They figured if it has to fly, it has to.
They had just seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind. They're like, man, I'm just spooked out by that.
Yeah, it was kind of a coincidence. Was this right around Devil's Tower?
Mashed potatoes, sales are just dropping.
Mashed potatoes were in
left and right.
This means something.
Succotash was out.
Are mashed potatoes hot? They are not.
They are not.
But they are delicious.
So yeah, this is widely regarded as one of the most credible UFO sightings that we have, just because there were 7 witnesses, 2 tape recordings, detection records of detection of unusual ground and airplane radar targets, and 16 millimeter color movie. So this is well documented. And to me, and it also sounds like to you guys, the explanations are pretty bogus, right?
Yeah.
Unburnt meteors, squid boat lights.
Yeah. Did they ever come back on it? Did they ever say, "All right, well, we know it wasn't what we said. We just don't know what it was"? Or did they double down at all?
I've read some recent publications around it, and it still sounds like they're sticking to their guns on it was Venus, it was unburnt meteors, it was
those
nothing.
Damn Kiwis.
Were they totally silent lights too? Because that's terrifying as well.
Yeah,
was there a sound accompanying it, or were they being chased
story,
this entire time just by the silent flashing?
The story by the guy who talked about the kids who were being chased down the road by the light said that specifically it would made no sound. It was just tracking them basically.
Physics be damned.
Right.
One visual explanation for UFOs are swamp gas. Have you guys heard about that? Methane or some kind of dense gas will be released, but and also I think Marfa, Texas has the Marfa lights.
Oh yeah,
we have the Oviedo lights.
Yeah, and the Oviedo lights.
Yep.
Very nice, man, Daddy.
But
the Oviedo lights.
Thank you, Fritz.
But even moonlight refracting light through clouds of gas wouldn't account for something chasing.
Maneuverability.
Maneuverability.
I feel like
disappearing and reappearing.
Right. The sort of cohesive orb that is moving around kind of changes the idea of it being like refracted gas light or whatever. This is like a thing like moving through the mist at you. This is not, oh, hey, I saw a sparkle. You know, these are people with radars. It's not like, you know, you're standing out in your backyard going, oh, maybe that was a firefly. This is like radar technology to make sure we're not crashing airplanes into each other. And like, hey, there's something out there and we don't know what it is.
Is there actual audio recordings of the
internal
pilot?
base communication? I believe there is one recording of one of the pilots as he radioed in to describe the light, and that is also pretty spooky if you look that up.
Well, let's see. You're listening to Fort Fritz on Real Radio 104.1.
Fort Fritz on Real Radio 104.1.
Welcome back to Fort Fritz. I think we've all thought about, robbing a bank before, but this man really takes it to the next level. This is Fred William Bowerman, notorious bank robber. Let's take a listen.
She's the one who does it.
You've never ever heard of Fred William Bowerman.
No, obviously not. No.
He was in the Christopher Guest movies.
That's Fred Willard.
Good guess.
I haven't.
Don't you love everything he's
Fred
in?
Willard.
He's
another one who is who he is in all the movies. And
Oh,
just
yeah,
like it.
yeah, it's true.
And you're happy about it. You're like, hey, it's Fred Willard.
Yeah, you know what to expect. Fred William Bowerman was an American bank robber and Depression-era outlaw. He has been described as a veteran hold-up man. His criminal career lasted about 20 years. Nearing 60 years of age, Bowerman was named number 46 by the FBI, landing himself on the FBI's 10 most wanted list in 1953.
Damn.
His last year alive, which I think is kind of a good goal. Like, you make it on that list, and then you can just die.
Because you're gonna.
Yeah.
Because everyone's
You
coming.
just got
That's
up
it.
there, yeah, exactly.
It's like being diagnosed with cancer at that point. You're like, well, guys, I'm top 10.
Yeah, here we are. I made it. There really isn't much on the early life of Fred William Bowerman. He was born in 1893 in Pipestone Township in Michigan, and his criminal career began in the 1930s. His first arrest was in Illinois for armed robbery in 1932.
Damn.
Yeah.
Hell of a first arrest.
So he served 5 years and was paroled in 1937, and didn't learn his lesson. Immediately began committing robberies throughout the Chicago area.
Like immediately. Like he walked out into a store and robbed something.
Pretty much. He was doing all these robberies in Chicago, but he was still currently living in Michigan, and he would drive to Chicago using stolen cars. He would just steal cars,
He was
drive to
commuting to
Chicago,
work.
yeah, and then I guess it'd steal another car and drive back.
What year is this?
He was first arrested in 1932. He was paroled in 1937. He committed 36 robberies between June and October in 1938. So just between those two, June and October, 36 robberies. He was captured within a year, and he was sentenced to Joliet Prison, where he spent another 7 more years locked up for his crimes. So he spent 7 years. He was locked up again in 1939. He spent 7 more years in jail. So at this point, he's done 12 years of jail.
Jesus.
And he's in his 30s now?
Let's see, he was born in 1893, and this is 1946, and I can't do math.
No,
He's
that's-
been around the sun a few times. After his release in 1946, Bowerman finally learned a lesson. He kept a low profile. But he was eventually identified as one of the several men who robbed a bank in South Bend, Indiana, for $53,000 in September of 1952.
Jesus.
I don't know now, but that's a lot of money for
Seems a lot of money.
1952.
Right.
That's a lot of money for now.
You get a steak for a nickel and a banana for a quarter.
But yeah,
Wait, bananas are more expensive than steaks.
Oh, I didn't really get a lot of banana information on this story. I apologize.
but yeah,
What are you
you still
doing?
can't get
didn't
McDonald's,
really know about
right?
the
Look
banana
up the price of
industry.
inflation on
Yeah.
bananas during the
didn't know.
1950 whatever.
I didn't Google
Banana inflation.
Fred William Bowerman and bananas.
Banana prices, banana index.
So this robbery was actually attracted national attention because a bank employee was shot for raising his hands too slowly.
Well, son of a bitch.
Yeah, so there you go. A little over a month after this incident, Bowerman participated in one of the most violent bank heists in American history.
He signed up for it. He volunteered.
He volunteered. He actually kind of organized this.
All right.
With 3 other men, Frank Vito, Glenn Chernick, and William Scholl. Scholl, Vito, and Chernick were from Chicago, and Bowerman was from Niles, Michigan. Scholl was 26, and he was the only one of the 4 with a clean record. A disabled Army veteran from World War II and a bartender in Chicago, he had met Bowerman in the tavern and became part of the gang on Bowerman's promise that he'd make $5,000 in 5 minutes. So that was Bowerman's like spiel to give everybody, like, you're going to get $5,000 in 5 minutes.
The elevator pitch.
I'm down now.
It's an elevator pitch.
On the afternoon of April 24th, 1953, at 10:19 a.m., 3 masked men entered the Southwest Bank in South St. Louis, Missouri, and attempted to hold up the bank. Each robber carried 2 pistols, and Bowerman himself carried a sawed-off shotgun. Ooh. Swinging that sawed-off shotgun, ringleader Fred Bowerman jumped onto a counter and shouted, "This is a hold-up! Everybody stand still!" The robbery started out as planned. They knew their target well. The neighborhood bank had almost about $200,000 ready for cash and paychecks. The men quickly gathered up around $140,000 from the bank tellers' cages and prepared to carry them out in a nylon satchel. However, unknown to any of the men, bank teller Alice Rudzica had set off a silent alarm, the first of several. As the robbers were about to make their escape, a number of police officers arrived and surrounded the bank. As the robbers began firing at police through the windows,
Jesus.
The bank employees hid in the vault to escape the firefight and tear gas thrown into the building.
So not only did they know exactly where to go to get all of this money, when the silent alarm was triggered, which they probably knew might have happened, they immediately opened fire?
No, it wasn't until the cops started to arrive. So, because it was a silent alarm. So, which is something that's kind of interesting is there was this photographer named Jack January, which I don't even know if that's
Such a
real.
tight name.
Yeah.
No, that's such a tight name.
Yeah, that's a type.
Wherever he was, he'd heard the radio broadcast or the police signal, and he was able to get to the shootout and get like close-up photos of the action at the bank because he like drove behind a police car from downtown at like 70 miles per hour to reach the scene.
Of
like,
course
how
he did.
gangstery is that?
That's how. There's a really well-known New York City photographer who would go into police stations late at night and would listen to the old radio.
Yeah.
So he was probably one of those
probably just
ambulance chasers.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, yeah.
Eventually, the robbers ran out of time and ammo, finding themselves trapped. Bowerman's remaining partners panicked. Police officers Melbourne Stein and Robert Heitz.
Melbourne Stein.
They were patrolling like 2 blocks away. They were the first officers to respond. Stein took the front door and Heitz went through the side entrance. Heitz exchanged pistol shots with the robbers and was wounded by a blast from Bowerman's shotgun.
Bowerman got it.
Got him.
You got an injury?
Knowing that he was totally screwed, Bowerman took bank customer Eva Hamilton hostage.
Oh, no.
And held a shotgun on her as he attempted to escape.
I'm thinking in my head that sawed-off shotgun.
Nobody move or the
Yeah.
gets it.
Oh, Jesus.
So he's basically using her as a human shield. And he like kind of went outside and was like, "Nobody move, I'll shoot her." And he like shoved her on the pavement and broke both of her wrists.
Damn.
Bowerman was shot in the chest by Melbourne
Good.
Stein, and the bullet pierced a lung and launched his spine. Eva Hamilton was fine aside from her broken wrists.
He must have been paralyzed.
Oh yeah, it totally f***ed him up. Also, when they realized that they were trapped, Bowerman had ordered his accomplices to grab a woman. You know, like he did.
I mean, why not?
Just grab a woman.
It worked the first time.
So one of the
Grab a woman, throw her on the ground,
break
and then
her
let
wrist,
someone shoot you.
and then let someone shoot you. Yeah,
And that's how
It
we'll get
worked
out of this,
great.
boys. I know this is going to sound crazy.
just do it. Somehow you win. So one of the accomplices, Scholl, he picked this lady, Mrs. Cantino, but he let her go when she began crying that she was a mother.
When he heard her adorable last name.
Yeah,
Cantino.
Mrs. Cantino. So he was actually married. He had kids. So I think the fact that this woman was like, "Don't shoot me, I'm a mother," like he was like, all right, and like kind of just like tossed her
This whole
aside.
none of these dudes.
He actually attempted to go for a backup weapon, but by the time police came in, they disarmed him. He suffered a wound on his back in a gunfight, and he surrendered in the bank. He cried when a St. Louis Circuit Court jury found him guilty.
He cried in court?
Yeah, and he was sentenced to 25 years. Frank B. Vito, he was 25. He was already a convicted felon. He was on free bond from a liquor store robbery when he took part in Southwest Bank robbery, so he was already like wanted.
In that state too, probably.
Yes.
Right?
Basically, when they surrounded him, he thought he had actually shot an officer. So when they got to him, he was like, you know what? He looked over to the other guys and he's like, "We're going to get 99 years. I can't take a pinch." And he just shot himself in the head right
Oh
there.
my God!
Just go out.
Wait, hold on. Like,
Frank Vito.
Frank Vito.
This is when they were apprehended?
Yeah, so when the cops got in, after
they
they
didn't
shot Bowerman.
They didn't frisk him? Or, oh, no, in the bank.
In the bank,
Yeah.
in the
Oh, my
lobby,
God.
they came in, and he was just like, I think I shot one of those cops, so I'm going to get 99 years. And he just, like, shot himself in the head right there.
And then the person right next to him goes,
No, dude. It's
yo,
like
you heard that, right?
Dude, it's only like 10 to 12.
Yo, I didn't shoot no cop. That was him.
You're only 25. Oh.
That was Danny DeVito's nephew.
Great uncle.
Frank Vito.
Oh.
The fourth member of the robbery team was Glenn Chernick, and he was a Marquette University college football star. He was 22. He was the getaway driver. He actually fled when police arrived, but
Probably the smartest one.
Laters.
but he was found 3 days later at his dad's house in Chicago. He was a quarterback for Marquette University, but he was expelled, and he was awaiting trial for theft of wholesale cigarettes. So he's like, you know what? I stole some cigarettes. Let's just go straight to robbing a
Straight to bank
bank.
robbery,
So he was also sentenced to 25 years.
They could have made a lot of money from those cigarettes.
Bowerman was taken to a hospital where he tried to identify himself as John W. Frederick. However, FBI used his fingerprints to prove his identity. He never talked with police, and he ended up dying in the hospital.
No snitching.
No snitching.
So he used his first name as his last name?
Yeah, he just gave him this fake name.
Wow, what a genius.
Yeah.
No
Yeah.
one's ever thought of that
Master
one.
of subterfuge.
His name was Fred William
Bowerman, and he told them that he was John W. Frederick.
He still kept the W? Wow.
Yeah, well, you know,
He's really.
And
Wow.
gotta keep
John?
it easy to
All in on the
remember.
W.
Yeah.
John.
Could have gone with a Chad or a Steven.
Jesus.
Cuck.
I'll edit that out.
More than 40 shots have been exchanged, but none of the customers or employees were injured, thankfully. Aside from poor Eva Hamilton, who broke her wrist. Everybody was hiding in, like, all the employees were in the basement, so all the cops helped them get out. When they heard shots upstairs, everyone was, like, wiping their faces from tear gas and everything. The case is regarded as one of St. Louis Police Department's finest moments.
Good for them.
There's actually a movie about this. It is called The Great St. Louis Bank Robbery.
Huh.
It was made in 1959, so just 6 years after
Damn.
the bank robbery.
Whoa!
It
That was current as hell for that.
right.
Yeah.
It was based on the actual holdup of Southwest Bank. It was made on location by producer-director Charles Guggenheim, and among the cast was a known
The Goog.
the Goog, Guggen.
AKA the Goog.
The Goog.
You know,
I'll
the
get
Goog.
into
By the Goog. It was a
Yeah,
Goog
it was
production.
like Goog's like first movie.
Goog flicks.
Another
Yeah.
Goog joint.
Goog flicks. This was one of Steve McQueen's first movies. Actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
And remember
And it was the Great St. Louis?
the Great St. Louis Bank Robbery
Okay.
in 1959.
Okay, cool.
And do you remember Officer Melbourne Stein, the guy who actually shot Bowerman? He actually had a small speaking role in the film.
He didn't get to
for
play
him.
himself?
He
though?
didn't get to play
Oh, that's a
himself.
bummer.
That was portrayed by Crahan Denton.
Oh,
All
the
right.
Denton man.
Who could
Denty.
forget?
Oh,
Oh,
Denty.
Denty.
But Melbourne Stein actually, he retired from the department in 1973, and at age 97 is the oldest living retiree.
That is super, super cool.
Yeah.
Of the police department or of all time?
You know...
Of the Goog.
Of the Googs.
Of
the Googs of the 1973
West Place.
Googs.
That's crazy.
Yes.
You're listening to Fort Fritz on Real Radio 104.1.
Fort Fritz on Real Radio 104.1.
Welcome back to Fort Fritz here on Real Radio 104.1. My name is Fritz. Jumping back into it, I know a lot of people are out there probably playing video games, but have you heard of the urban legend of Polybius? This one is also on the iHeartRadio app. Just search Fort Fritz. Enjoy.
Look, have you ever heard of the video game Polybius?
No, I haven't.
No.
Sounds fun.
Sounds like a
Yeah, it
It's like a
sounds
weird
fun.
mushroom or something.
It sounds
How do you spell it? P-O-L-I?
Polybius.
Polybius?
Polybius.
Polybius?
Is it
Polybius?
like Mobius?
This is not a game that to be, shall we say, toyed with. This game
Ooh, I like that.
isn't a game.
well, what is it then?
Well, let me tell you a story. In 1981, in a few Portland, Oregon game rooms, a new and strange game appeared without any fanfare. The game was called Polybius. And it was just basically a black cabinet like this one with Polybius, one controller, and that's it. And it seems that the game was an instant success. Almost immediately, lines began to form around it. But things seemed a little different. Players started playing almost obsessively, playing for hours on end, and some players even getting in fights for their turn at the game.
Okay, so this was a single-player game?
Yes.
But it was an arcade game, so obviously you would have people
waiting
in line and watching.
Yeah, that style of game.
Or like the person right back behind that player going, "You suck. You're gonna die. You suck."
Right, you definitely turn around and hit that dude. Like,
I'm not gonna let you continue. You suck.
Yeah.
Like a backhand.
And then you just punch that 12-year-old right in the face. Now, things started taking even a darker turn. Players began to feel nausea, tremors, amnesia, and some even started experiencing night terrors.
This all sounds like standard gamer shit at this point. Like, this is like kids just walked in on like Counter-Strike and stuff.
No, this kind of sounds like when they had that Japanese TV show that would have those like red flashing screens and give all those people seizures.
That was Pokemon. That was the original Pokemon.
What?
Yep, that's when they had the original Pokemon. They had to ban it for a while because the flashing lights of the transformations caused people to go into seizures.
Oh,
any epilepsy.
Early epilepsy stuff.
Yep. A lot of fun. So just hey, if you got kids, just put them in front of Pokemon and wait a little bit. And that's the diagnosis.
That's how you know.
That's the test. That's the test. Just give them 5 minutes on that and you're good.
As host of this podcast, let me just say, do not do that if you have small children. All right, the lawyer immediately called me on that one.
But still with this game, even though people were experiencing these extreme side effects, they reportedly couldn't stop playing. Now, no one is sure where these games came from or what their true purpose was. Even though one player reportedly tried to commit suicide because of the constant night terrors he was getting from this game.
Okay.
But still, no one just, they just let it play. Hey, still making a lot of money. But there were multiple reports of sightings of, wait for it, men in black servicing the machine. Witnesses say that they appeared to be extracting data from the machines and making slight changes to the circuitry. But one thing they never touched were the quarters. They seemed uninterested in the money the games made. And so they're always there and never take out the quarters. And of course, the game shop owner would just take the quarters, but was never servicing the machine, never did anything else to it. Just opened up the front, took the quarters out, closed it up.
Are there any accounts of what the actual gameplay, like what was the story of this game?
That's the thing. There's a lot of different reports. Some people say that it was a puzzle sort of game. Some people say it was more of a quick shooter sort of game. One of the things they agree on is that the graphics were far beyond anything at that time, that it used a combination of vector and raster graphics, which you can't really do in 81.
Wow.
Yeah, you can't do, I think now to do vector and raster graphics would be near impossible because of, they use a different sort of screen.
Well, it's also different engines, like graphics engines.
Oh, but with vector and raster, a vector game is something like, if you remember Tempest, where it's just lines, where that's vector graphics.
Kind of like Asteroid, where you just shoot
right, that's vector graphics
triangle.
is lines. Raster is pixels. And so it was a combination of those two, which at the time wasn't really a possibility. Some have speculated that it was part of a government Black Ops experiment similar to MK Ultra.
Yeah.
That was either testing people's abilities for possible recruitment or testing people's limits to see how much stimulus the human brain can handle.
That's exactly what I thought, dude. Last Starfighter.
Last Starfighter, yes! I love that movie.
Yes. And that's exactly where the movie got its impetus from, is from the story.
No.
Dude,
Really?
Last Starfighter is
That's
fantastic.
Yeah.
As like a kid who played video games, that was just
It was
like,
the best.
it was fantastic.
It was
It
the
was
best.
just like, oh man.
You're like, come on, let this happen.
Right.
But then you think about the game I was playing, like something like Robotron. Probably don't want that to happen.
Yeah,
Nobody's
Robotron was just
surrounded.
like a post-apocalyptic nightmare of like having to kill over and over and over again, trying to do 90 different levels and then
there's
you
just
start
more of
over
them and
again.
more of them and more of them and more of them.
I played Pole Position.
All right, so you were like an Italian like racer,
Yeah, that's
like
me at the age of 4.
Claudio.
I was 25. Now, there have been various theories about the origins of Polybius. In 2006, on a coinop.org comment section, and everything good comes from comment sections, a man named Stephen Roach said that he was a part of its creation, and he said he worked for a company called Sinuslotion, but was commissioned by a South American company to do the work. But they soon found out that they were in over their heads with the advanced tech that they were working on. Now, the word Sinuslotion is a quasi-German word loosely meaning sense delete or sensory deprivation.
Nice.
Some say it sounds like a German word made up by someone who doesn't know how to speak German.
Yep.
Just that's not the way the words would be put together.
Sense deletion.
What?
Was that German? I thought he was speaking in German. That was absolutely amazing. I thought we had a German guy in the room. Fritz, I get it now!
I know a couple words.
Now, Roach's accounts have been largely brushed off. However, there was, in fact, a man named Stephen Roach who worked within a Mexican company that was working on behavior modification and possibly brainwashing, and it ended up getting shut down by the government, and reportedly Stephen and his wife are still on the run to this day. So, is there maybe some, truth to this? Now, there's a lot of questions on whether the game even ever existed. You can find a number of games on the internet that claim to recreate the gameplay of Polybius, but none of them seem to completely agree on all the elements of the game. But either way, you can never be quite sure what you're getting into when you're playing a mysterious video game that appears one day at your local game room, like this black shut-off cabinet right here that for some reason Angela thinks would be a keen idea for us to turn on.
Do you really consider this like a local game room?
No, I don't.
I live 2 hours.
You are listening to Fort Fritz on Real Radio 104.1.
Fort Fritz on Real Radio 104.1.
Good evening. Welcome back to Fort Fritz. Fritz here with you. And now for something downright terrifying. This is Richard Chase, Vampire of Sacramento. Enjoy.
I'm really freaking out. Have you ever heard of the Vampire of Sacramento?
No. What? No, I haven't.
Nope.
Please be warned, this next story has graphic depictions of violence, animal abuse, sexual assault, and mutilation.
So the Vampire of Sacramento refers to Richard Trenton Chase. He was a notorious hybrid of spree and serial killer in the late 1970s. He killed 6 people in less than a month. He was born May 23rd, 1950. He died the day after Christmas in 1980. He was 30 years old. So Richard was raised in somewhat a normal family structure, 1950s, a small amount of child abuse, which was deemed societally acceptable for the time. But
like spankings?
A little bit more severe than that. But he was raised in a very healthy household. His parents provided everything he never wanted for anything.
Other than some light slammings?
From a very early age, Richard started to exhibit abnormal qualities. He had the classic McDonald triad, which we find in a lot of serial killers. So these behaviors in childhood are bedwetting, arson, and the torture of animals.
Yeah.
He was especially strong in this last.
2 for 3.
Well,
What is that called again?
the McDonald triad.
I'll let you decide which ones.
It was this last trait in particular that Richard had a very strong liking for, the torture of animals. He was known to torture neighborhood cats. There is a story about him stabbing the family dog in the paws repeatedly and joking about cutting off its feet.
Wow, that's terrible.
So things progress. Richard grows a little bit older. He is, despite some of his oddities, very popular in school, popular with girls.
He was super funny.
He was...
He was very charming other than stabbing puppies in the paws.
He was also, he got into drugs a little early in his teens, so using LSD, using pot. So he had his drug friends, he had regular friends, he would go out on dates with girls, but it also became known very quickly that Richard was impotent. So he, as many dates as he could get, he could never perform sexual acts with
And that rumor spreads quickly
very
in high
quickly
school.
in high school. So things,
Not that I know.
Things go on, and Richard learns a little bit more about anatomy. He's particularly fascinated by anatomy. And he discovers that the impotence rather comes from the lack of engorgement of the sponge in the penis with blood. So men get erections because they have a lot of blood in their penis. So Richard, now it is known that he probably suffered from something known as Cotard's delusion, which Cotard's delusion is the feeling that you are lacking organs or that you are decaying on the inside or that you're a walking corpse. Richard started becoming obsessed with the idea of having bad blood, of not having enough blood, that he was decaying or losing this on the inside. And he even went to a psychiatrist to talk about this. It was really unusual. And the psychiatrist dismissed it and let it go.
What year span was this?
So the high school for Richard probably would have been around the mid-'60s.
Okay.
And then he goes into his 20s. He moves out of his parents' house. He eventually gets a roommate, 2 women. He is a small-time drug dealer. He's still very, very odd. He's a thin man. He's rather timid, but still has a small circle of friends. And after living with these 2 women for a while, his behavior becomes increasingly strange. He was known to walk around in public when they had company, completely naked. He had very intense, off-putting behavior.
And that's weird,
Wait a
right?
minute,
Like,
yeah,
what's
walking
up?
around
It's a little
naked.
strange.
That reminds me of somebody who walks around with the balls out all the time over here.
So small, somewhat awkward societal things like this became more and more apparent with Richard, and his roommates eventually moved out. It was around this time also that the obsession with blood for Richard became more and more prevalent. He began to consume small animals, to purchase lots of rabbits, and he would take them home and blend them and drink the slurry that he had created.
Skinned or non-skinned?
Yeah.
Rabbit smoothie?
Rabbit smoothie. Yes.
Oh,
He was-
rabbit smoothie?
He was particularly interested in almost taking on the strength, like the character Renfield. Sometimes people call this Renfield syndrome, where he's taking on the life force of another creature by
the
consuming
rabbit?
it. Yes.
Strong like rabbit.
There are many tribes who also will drink the mentionables of opposing tribes, warriors. They will drink blood, and also even in current society, the placenta. A mother will ask for that to be taken home with them.
Because they're a weirdo.
It's a different mode of thought, man, daddy. You know, you're not on that
Weird
level.
one.
The
A
placenta
weird
is
one.
known to have lots of nutrients in it.
That is very true.
So do bananas.
Well,
Right, thank you. Yeah, get a steak.
They make shampoo out of animal placenta, so, you know.
Delicious.
Well, I'm not going to eat shampoo either.
Some gets in your mouth, though. And plus, you don't use shampoo.
Again, this behavior continues to escalate. Eventually, Richard tries to inject the blood of rabbits into his own veins.
That has to be bad.
It is
Into
bad.
Into his penis?
No. In just into his body, in order to prolong his own life, in order to fulfill his need for the blood he felt like he was losing all the time. He, even though it was a delusion, felt like he was constantly in pain. Later on in interviews, he would say that he felt like someone had stolen part of his arteries, or that the bones in his skull were facing backwards.
Ooh,
Whoa.
what?
What?
So
So
how,
he-
so he's looking out the back of his head all the time?
Or
No,
rather than
it's like it's an odd construction, constant headaches, like right, unnatural.
Yes, so imagine being under that sort of strain all the time. And so now he's in his mid-20s and he tries injecting this rabbit blood into himself. He gets blood poisoning, of course. And his parents finally, after just ignoring this crazy behavior for years, decide to check him into a mental facility. He goes into the Beverly Manor, and it's here because all he can talk about to the staff and other patients at this institution is blood and his consumption of blood, his particular like of rabbits and cats. It is also during this period, while he is staying here, he manages to catch 2 birds, break their necks, and drink the blood out of their bodies, and the staff
Damn.
catches him.
What?
Commitment to the game.
Yes. So he earns the nickname Dracula at Beverly Manor.
Earned.
Yeah.
Eventually, he is released under the semblance of rehabilitation. Now, we're approaching the late 70s now. So think 1976, 1977.
Okay.
His parents, like you do after your son gets out of a mental institution after consuming the blood of animals, get him his own apartment that they pay for.
Oh, perfect.
Why not release him into society? What could go wrong?
Yeah.
What, are you
By
gonna live with
himself.
him?
Yeah.
Yeah, the behavior escalates more and more and more.
Duh.
I can see their friends are like, "Why are you coddling him? Like he was injecting rabbit blood into his veins. You don't know him. You know he's changed a lot."
And then in 1977, things get worse between him and his family after he procures a .22 caliber automatic pistol.
Oh.
Yeah. He
America.
purchases this gun for $70. He asks his mother to buy him a shoulder holster, which she refuses to do, so he goes and steals one from a thrift shop. He then proceeds to go back to his parents' house, and he shoots the family cat in front of his mother.
No.
After shooting the cat, he takes the blood coming out of the corpse of the cat and rubs it all over his face and body. They revoke their invitation to Christmas with Richard.
Ooh.
This was apparently
Burn.
Yeah.
sent him into experimenting further with his obsession with not only blood, but murder. So on December 29th, 1977, 51-year-old engineer Ambrose Griffin is helping his wife unload groceries out of the car in their driveway. He collapses out of nowhere. She wonders what's wrong, and it turns out that he has been shot with a .22 caliber bullet. There is no one around. There are no clues except for a few shell casings down the road. This was, in fact, Richard Chase, pushing his limits.
So this was a handgun?
This was a handgun.
Okay, so it was some kind of like automatic.
Correct.
Well, yeah, you said automatic.
It's an automatic because there were shell casings. Revolvers don't.
Automatic.
Semi-automatic.
Semi-automatic. Okay.
Revolvers don't eject casings. Right. Around this time, after the shooting, Richard, with the fear of being caught, puts on a normal semblance to his parents, but socially just falls apart. He stops bathing. Just any form of self-grooming just ignores. He begins wandering around the neighborhood. It is January in a bright orange parka, and with his current habits of drinking animal blood, he wanders around with dry blood all over him.
Yeah, there's no problem with Richards. He's fine. He just does this weird blood thing, just wanders around. Look at that kid.
Yeah, he just looks like he just pissed off PETA. That's about it.
Right, yeah.
Triggered much?
At one point, he adopts 2 Labrador Retrievers.
Oh, God, no.
Executes them and drinks their blood.
Son of a bitch, dude.
Well, my night's ruined.
Yeah.
All of these animals
what
being
a
killed.
Bummer.
We'll talk about people getting killed all day long. Talk about some dogs and cats like,
It's a bummer, yeah.
This leads up to the day of January 23rd, 1978. So, all in one day, we see the escalation of a serial killer spree killer in a man that normally takes, I would say, years for any other killer. The day starts off with Richard wandering around in his bright orange parka. He is looking for houses. This also contributes to his nickname as the Vampire of Sacramento. When he would go from house to house, it starts off as burglary. He would only choose houses that were the doors were unlocked. He felt that a locked door meant he wasn't welcome, that he hadn't been invited into the house, but an open door, an unlocked door, was fair game. So he's wandering around the neighborhood looking for unlocked doors, and he checks a house, runs around the back, and stares coldly through the window, the plate glass window, at a woman who is standing right there and sees him. She said that he examined her with such a lack of emotion, it was almost like he was buying something. Like he was like maybe looking over how you would feel about buying a car or buying a new piece of jewelry.
That's a hell of a
he did
description.
Nothing. He did nothing but lit a cigarette and walked away. So, a little bit later on, at the home of Robert and Barbara Edwards, he finds an open door and goes in. He goes to their infant baby's room and proceeds to open up the dresser drawers and piss in all the clothes. And then he defecates on the child's bed.
Jesus.
He begins rummaging around the house, stealing things, and he has a bag full of objects that they found later when Robert and Barbara come home. They chase him around the house screaming, "Stop, stop," and he screams back at them, "I was taking a shortcut, I was taking a shortcut."
That's insane.
He manages to slip past them and runs out the front door. So, again, it's this man covered in dried-in blood in a bright orange parka. He's filthy, he's skinny, he looks like death. He and piss in this child's room. They chase him out of the house. He goes immediately to the nearest food mart to buy an orange soda because he was thirsty.
Come on, that makes you
thirsty work.
Right.
It is here that he runs into an old high school friend, Nancy Holden. She does not recognize him, and she is frankly scared of him. He is also carrying around the .22 in his shoulder holster this whole time. He tries to get a ride from her, and she manages to ward him off. About an hour later, he spies, wandering around the neighborhood, a van that was previously at the food mart. He tries the door, and as he's trying the door, Teresa Wallen is approaching the front door. She's taking out the garbage. He pulls his .22, shoots her once through the hand, which he has put out to stop the bullet. It pops out of her elbow, nicks her neck, then he shoots her again in the head. Then he goes directly up to her from about 6 inches away and shoots her once more in the head.
Oh, man.
Point blank.
Point blank.
Called the full John Wick.
At this point, Richard drags the body inside. He goes to the kitchen and gets a knife, takes a dried yogurt cup that he finds from the garbage that Teresa was carrying into the bedroom, and proceeds to stab her so hard that it splits her sternum open and cuts her open, moves around her organs, repeatedly stabs them. Everything is damaged except for the kidneys. He then fills the yogurt cup with as much blood as he can from the stomach cavity and drinks it. He rubs blood all over his face and hands and leaves the building.
He desanguinates her.
Yes.
And then bathes in her blood. and then walks away?
Police basically found bloody footprints and handprints. He had been smart enough to wear rubber gloves, or aware enough to wear rubber gloves. Things get even worse from here on. In 4-day span, he is seen wandering around the neighborhood, going door to door asking for old copies of Mad Magazine and Cosmo Magazine.
Weird.
This leads up to January 27th. At 9 a.m., 38-year-old Evelyn Meredith is planning to get her son, Jason, who is 6, ready for a trip to go into the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains. Her friend, Danny Meredith, comes over and she asks him to run out and get snowshoes, or to rent snowshoes for Jason. While Danny is away, Richard Chase shows up at the house. He goes around the back, he finds the back door unlocked, and goes inside. Evelyn is in the bathtub, and he shoots her once in the head, killing her instantly. He drags the body from the tub onto the bed, and it is thought, no one knows for sure, that at this time, Jason, her son, comes into the bedroom, where Richard proceeds to shoot him twice in the head.
Christ.
He then continues to defile the body, as he had before with Teresa Wallen, when Danny Meredith comes back to the house. He greets him in the hallway and shoots him between the eyes once, killing him.
Jeez.
All of these just point blank range,
Yes,
right?
as close as possible. It's at this point that he hears a small child's cry from the other room.
Oh, no.
That is of 20-month-old nephew of Evelyn Meredith, David Ferraria. After defiling the corpse of Evelyn Meredith and proceeding to sodomize it, after eating part of the liver and removing as much blood as possible, he goes and kills the 20-month-old. He leaves part of the brain in the bathtub, decapitates the child, and leaves the house with a bucket of blood and the infant's body wrapped in a blanket under his arm. The police worked very, very hard on this case, and with the help of Nancy Holden, after recognizing a police sketch of the suspect, they were able to apprehend Richard Chase, who was eventually sentenced to death in 1980 at the behest of other inmates and the people surrounding him in prison, in San Quentin prison. He overdosed on his antidepressants and died of toxic ingestion.
So you think my oyster boil is as bad as this guy? Bungalower in the bus up next. And your last shot to win $1,000 this evening is coming up. Listen to that keyword. Text it into 200-200.
Until
And good
next
luck.
time, pleasant dreams.